Welcome to the NorthJersey.com Sports Show Live. My name is Dave Rivera. I'm the sports director at NorthJersey.com and the Bergen Record. And tonight, we're going to talk baseball. We're going to talk New York Yankees. We're going to talk New York Mets. We're going to talk if we're going to have a major league season. At this point, we don't know. We're in early April. The season was supposed to start a week ago, and it hasn't. And we just don't know when it will start. But we're going to talk baseball. With me is tonight Pete Caldera, our New York Yankees beat writer for the Bergen Record, and also Justin Toscano, our New York Mets writer from the Bergen Record, and both from NorthJersey.com. Guys, how are you doing tonight?
Great, Dave. It's I'm here in Manhattan. In fact, it's right now. It's 7 o'clock Eastern, and I can hear out my window some of the cheers for the medical personnel that happens every night here in New York. It's a very nice thing to hear because listen, we're all in this together, and we don't support anybody more than the people who are trying to take care of everyone here in New York and everywhere else in this country.
Well deserved. And Justin, how are you doing?
Yeah, Pete, it's nice that they do that. Yeah, those people are the only ones who should be out of the house on a regular basis. The rest of us are shacked in. I've been driving up the electricity bill here, playing a lot of video games, but we'll make it through it. Like Pete said, we're in this together, and soon enough, or eventually would be a better word, baseball will be back. But it's good to join you guys here.
Yeah, we're going to talk a few topics tonight. We're also going to take your questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the comments field. We've got Zach Miller, who's backstage. He's going to be looking at the questions, and he'll pop in if you've got anything to ask us. So please go ahead, ask us. We'd be more than happy to answer them. I'll ask you both. I'll start with Pete. Both of you guys were in Florida, you know, when the virus outbreak was really hitting the United States, especially the New York City area. You guys are down there. You're getting ready for spring training. It's mid-March, gearing up for a season, and then all of a sudden, this crazy news is developing. Why don't you talk a little bit about what it was like to be down in Florida? Pete, you're in Tampa. Justin, you're in Port St. Lucie. Pete, what was it like to be down there at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of. It seemed like it was slow developing, and then all of a sudden, the news changed every hour. The last exhibition, when they halted exhibition play, it was March the 12th, and the Yankees were on the east coast of Florida, and by that time, the writers we were all out of the clubhouses because of the ban that they put in, and so we were sort of covering the team at a distance a few days before the exhibition season halted, and then you went from covering what was basically practices to informal practices to now guys are scattered, and we're just getting guys as they came in, rolling up the driveway to talk to players as they came into the parking lot to see what was going on, what sort of informal workouts were going on, and at that same time. That's when the first COVID-19 cases were showing up on the Yankees minor league side. And, in retrospect, and I mean, it seems like a long time ago, but it was only 3 weeks ago, the fact that they only had 2 positives should be considered a minor miracle in itself, that it wasn't more widespread among the organization.
Yeah, Pete, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I was talking to a couple of Mets minor leaguers, and just they were telling me about just the shared facilities is the thing you have to worry about. And I know we'll get to if there's going to be a season later, but that's really the thing you're worried about, is that so many people, especially on the minor league side, 150, 200 players in minor league camp, so many people use all the facilities, from the locker rooms to the dining rooms to the cafeteria to the batting cages, and it's kind of like a smoking gun. But on the Mets side, they had Donovan Mitchell Sr., a team employee. His son, Donovan Mitchell Jr., actually tested positive for coronavirus a day after his teammate on the Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert, tested positive, and that's when the NBA shut down the season. So you kind of got a feeling that baseball was on the clock to do something. They did, and then now we're left waiting.
And Justin, you were, so close to that situation. Were you ever concerned about that at all, impacting you personally?
Not really. I had I know I told you guys that I had developed some flu-like symptoms right after that, but I wasn't too concerned because yeah, I don't really try to live in fear. I know it's a serious thing, but it's something that, look, until you test positive, it's not worth worrying about. But I had tried to retroactively count back the days since I gave Donovan Mitchell a handshake, or if he gave me a pat on the back, or something like that. And I think it was close to the where I wouldn't have been at risk anyways. So it wasn't concerning, but you certainly think about it, because I know a lot of the reporters, we didn't think it was super necessary to close the clubhouse, and if you did that, then it's like, why are you even playing games? But as this went on, it gets more serious. So you start to think about it a little bit, but I don't think you're ever concerned. Now, if they were to start baseball 3 weeks from now, I think you would be concerned, because it's like, you don't know who has this thing. And one of those Mets minor leaguers, Jake Mangum, their 4th round pick from last year, said, described it as an invisible virus. And that's kind of really the perfect term from it, because with how we're lacking in testing in this country, you just don't know who has it. And I think that's the more concerning part, and why the measures we're taking now are comforting, and perhaps the only comfort, we can get from with something on the outside like that.
Major League Baseball at first decided to postpone the season 2 weeks, is what they said. Now, I think that was probably wishful thinking, and obviously they postponed the season indefinitely since that point. Pete, I'll start with you, but I'll ask both of you this question. When can you possibly see a baseball season beginning, when there's, so many things have just been canceled, and, you're talking about people can't even hang out in groups anymore of 10. When do you think that we could possibly see baseball this summer?
I wouldn't bank on seeing baseball until July 1st, and I think that's a conservative at the earliest. There still needs to be a period of a second spring training to go through, whether that's in Florida, and I doubt that would be in Florida at this point. Probably more likely either off-site or on where the major league teams are currently situated. It would be more likely. You need that ramp up, and you also need the all clear in certain cities to have games. And then that sort of brings up what Zach Britton said on MLB Network Radio today about the fact that the union and the owners have already talked about starting a season in empty ballparks at certain neutral sites, just to get the amount of games they need to have a legitimate season going. But I think, listen, I wouldn't bank on seeing any baseball until about July 1.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I would, if I were a betting man, I'd put my money on no sooner than, July 15th. I mean, you look at even Toronto suspending events, not sporting events, but city and events and gatherings through, June 30th. And then you begin to realize the magnitude of this thing with how New York hasn't even hit its peak yet. New York, New Jersey with coronavirus. And I think, Pete and what he mentioned and with Zach Britton is an interesting topic that people have considered from the start, is those neutral site games and no fans. But I'm of the opinion that I don't think you can play games until you can have the fans in there. I know they want a legitimate season to get as many games in as they can, but look, if it's not safe for fans to be in there, why should teams, be traveling? Why should, players be using the same facilities? Like, we need to make sure this is 100% before MLB and the union go forward with anything. And by that, I mean 100% clear. Like, we have the okay. Movie theaters, restaurants, everything else is back open. They can't rush this. And because of that reason, I lean toward, even the middle of July being very generous. Like, I would say maybe not even until August. If that, right now, you just kind of, maybe it's because we're waiting so long, but you just kind of get the feeling that, like, there's a chance there might not be a season at all, especially because baseball was supposed to start last week, but now college football, a sport which, is set to begin in months, after the summer, they're talking about whether that's going to be heavily delayed. So if they're talking about that, it's like you start to wonder about baseball and whether there'll be, a season or a long one, or whether it's going to go deep into November, which, I think it could. I'd be interested to hear Pete's thoughts on that, because I don't think they have another option if they want a legitimate season than going late into November, into December.
It's you're talking mid-July, and the players have to get together first, as Pete was mentioning. The players have to get together, even when you clear everybody to come together. The players have to have some sort of camp, don't you think, Pete? They've got to have at least a couple of weeks. I mean, why don't you talk about what are these players doing in the meantime? I know they've got to work out and they've got to stay in shape, but they've got to at least come together and have some sort of camp, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously players are scattered about on every team right now. The hitters. They always say, and it's true, spring training is for pitchers. The hitters, 30 at bats, you can get ready for a season. Well, most of these guys have had 30 at bats already, the regulars anyway. So I don't think the ramp up for position players would be that big of a deal. It's all about rebuilding up arms again, and obviously you're going to have some sort of expanded roster when you get back to playing major league games, if you do this year, and you'll probably have something like a 15-man staff. And ways to get around the fact that your starting pitchers have to rebuild themselves up to get to the point where they need to go 7 innings if they do anymore. That's all part of the ramp up, and I think every team has to deal with this, and this is the sort of thing that the union and the owners are sort of discussing right now about not only what the schedule is going to look like, but how deep the rosters are going to be when they start.
Well, Justin, I'll ask you that question, Justin. I mean, if it's July 15th, if it's July 30th, what does a season? Can you crystallize what a season could possibly look like when you're starting in July, pushing into August, and the fall months are coming?
Yeah, and I don't know if you can visualize it perfectly, because there's always going to be the camp. And look, when we've missed months of the season, these players especially are going to be really itching to go. So of course you're going to hear a lot of players be open to more doubleheaders, less off days. But you've got to be careful, because injuries or things can define a career. So you don't want to put too much risk on it over a season like this. But I think you're going to see more doubleheaders, less off days built in. And if you talk about, the season end, I mean, in my opinion, I think you're talking middle of November, at the very least for the regular season, some sort of a postseason, unless they just want to do fewer games. Then you end at the end of October, spend November for the postseason, and, end around Thanksgiving or something like that. I think that's certainly feasible, but you're going to have, more doubleheaders somehow built in there, less off days, and that goes with what Pete said with the expanded rosters. But you've got to be careful, because of course everybody's going to be ready to go, everybody's going to be amped up, but this is also an unprecedented time. So how do you ramp up pitchers through a mini, quote unquote, mini spring training? Are there going to be any exhibition games, or are they going to be just facing live hitting and live BP sessions or something like that, or intra-squad games? It's weird, but I will say this: when you talk about a season, Dave, and crystallizing what that's going to look like, if MLB and the union had any funky, creative, weird postseason plans that they've been wanting to try out, now's the year to do it. I think they're going to need something creative. Right. Yeah.
And let me just throw in there, before you get to a postseason tournament, I think you have to eliminate interleague play right now. I mean, you have find a way to in that schedule.
Right.
If you insist on having a division winner, you're going to have to schedule more games within your division. So get rid of interleague play, redouble. Get those games against your own division. Even that out, and then when you get to November, if that's where the tournament is, obviously more teams are going to be involved in there. But think of this too. If you're a Yankee fan, you've been waiting to see your team in the World Series. You're probably looking at a neutral site World Series if you're playing in late November, and you're not going to have those games at Yankee Stadium. So that's that's a huge blow too for Yankees fans.
Pete, are you talking about? Oh, go ahead, Justin.
The season in general, Pete. Do you think? I mean, do you think neutral site is feasible? Because I've heard people bring up this sort of thing like college conference tournaments or like NBA Summer League, where, hey, everybody's in the same city, you play in the same venue, like they just scatter times, worst case. But to me, that seems like it's a little bit of a threat for hotspots with this virus moving. I mean, what do you think? Do you think neutral site is plausible, or how do you think?
I guess I mean, it's on the table. I mean, it has to be in consideration. I would hope it would only be in consideration for this year. And listen, we haven't even discussed, and there's always a possibility of a second wave of COVID-19 hitting in the fall again too. And then what does that do to everything? But barring that, I think you have to look at it. If you're going to play deep into November, I don't think you won't be playing in any Eastern cities. But going forward, I hope that, listen, there's a lot of creative things that Major League Baseball is going to be thinking about implementing if we do have a season this year. But I would certainly hope that when we get down to it, a neutral site playoff or World Series does not become a permanent or something that's actually thought of as something that MLB wants to do going forward. Because I mean, that just that takes away October games in the Bronx. You don't want to see that.
There are two questions on Facebook that are kind of connected. One is asking do you have any idea, is there an actual drop dead date for the season, whether it's starting it or ending it? Have you guys heard anything about that? And then the second question, it's a separate question, but it kind of plays into this one. Scott Boras floated the idea of possibly having the World Series over Christmas. You're talking about what now, getting to 2021 or maybe New Year's Eve, who knows? I mean, what could that be like? And is that crazy? Or do you guys see, like, is there a date where you just say, no, I can't do it? You just can't have baseball past a certain date.
If I could, I would have to think that any baseball season would have to end before Thanksgiving, because you have to think of the next season too, and how pitchers rest up for and prepare for, if you're going to have a normal 2021 season that opens on March 26, 27, you're going to have a rest period that's somewhat normal. So I don't see it going to Christmas Eve. I would think that anything that baseball does would have to end at some time in mid to late November.
Yeah, same here. Thanksgiving latest for a World Series Game 7. I mean, I would, you need time to ramp up for the next season. And like I said earlier, weird year. Do you really want to risk people's health and just everything? 2021, we hope, is going to be a normal year. And if you use that assumption, you shouldn't put all your eggs into a basket for this year, which is going to be a strange, odd season if we even have one. So guys need time to rest. Look, I mean, you can't be pushing 2021 and then give these guys 5 weeks off and then
but they haven't played this year. They're off already.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they've already had is it not 7 months off?
Garrett Cole's playing catch in the backyard with his wife right now.
Yes, we've seen the video.
Yeah. I mean, guys are trying to ramp up for a season still. I mean, it's hard for pitchers right now. It really is.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like hitters, everybody's talking about, more time for injured players. And I know the Yankees have a lot of them. The Mets have a few, but with the Mets, like the couple, Yoenis Cespedes, Jed Lowry, look, a lot of these guys are just laying, I've heard, or just kind of chilling around at home because a lot of their facilities aren't open. So it's like they can't get a lot of that baseball activities work. So kind of like what you were talking about, Pete, it's like they haven't played. So it's like, that's just different than staying in shape. I mean, it's not like you can just stay in shape and then be ready for baseball games.
Right.
There's one other, point here is the stadium use right now. I mean, we've seen some arenas actually being used as makeshift hospitals in the country. We have a question now on Twitter. Have you heard of any plans or any talk of using possibly Yankee Stadium, Citi Field, as a makeshift hospital, an area where they can stage patients? Is that a possibility? And if so, I mean, obviously that would really play a role into what happens in those buildings over the course of the summer.
Dave, I would go back to what happened in 9/11, and it's all about the real estate you have. I mean, it's Shea Stadium was sort of a staging area for and Bobby Valentine and the Mets were. And I was covering the Mets at that time. I was chagrined to hear that Justin Toscano was in kindergarten at the time when I was covering the Mets in 2001.
Didn't even know what was going on.
Yes, yeah. Thanks
he still doesn't know what's going on.
Telling me that,
Oh.
but yeah, but
You're not wrong.
You had a huge parking lot in Queens where it was, and you know where Shea Stadium, Citi Field is located. That it's sort of a central area that was a staging area where you could you had personnel and you could move, you could gather and do things. I'm not so sure Yankee Stadium is that. It would be that type of site. But right, if there's something that had to be done out there, I mean, you see what's happening at Louis Armstrong Stadium right out there in Corona, Queens, right across the street. I think that's all part of, we're using everything right here in Manhattan, obviously Central Park, the Javits Center. We're using every available piece of real estate we can right now to get by and get through this.
I haven't heard anything specifically about Citi Field, but I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's like as needed, like Pete said. I mean, it's all hands on deck right now. This is people have called it a wartime effort. And I think if Citi Field needs to be used in some capacity, I think they could certainly use the parking lot as a wide open parking lot space, they're kind of on the edge near, the park. But I think, if it needs to be used, it needs to be used.
Listen, there are problems in this world right now that are much more important than baseball. If there were to be baseball, Pete, like you mentioned earlier, everybody was saying this could have been the Yankees season coming into this. With what happened with the Astros in the offseason, the Yankees getting Garrett Cole, everybody was talking about the Yankees being a World Series favorite, and then this craziness happens. What are your thoughts about that in terms of this, what could have been for the Yankees this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if you have a season, however long it is, 80 games, 100 games, 65 games, and go through a legitimate playoff tournament and get to the point where you're in the World Series and you win that World Series, you're the world champions. And I don't think anybody would look any different than that. You played a season, you became the champions. I don't look back at 1995 and they played 144 games and think the Braves, were not they were the world champions. They played a 144 game season. In 1981, I'm old enough to remember the strike year when you played 100 and something games, and you wound up with a Dodger Yankee World Series, and that still felt like a legitimate World Series. So even though I wasn't crazy about the split season that year, because it left a lot of legitimate, really good teams out of the tournament that year. But if they do play a season and they play a tournament, you'll have a champion, and that'll be a legitimate champion. But yes, will it have been the same if we didn't start the season like we were supposed to on March 26th? Obviously, but I think in the long scope of history, they will be remembered as a world champion. Period.
And Justin, to you, then this is another Facebook question. It's related to what Pete was just talking about with the Mets. People are talking, hey, maybe the Mets could have made a run this year. Maybe they could have been, if not a division winner, a wild card. There was always hope that the Mets could do something this year. What are some of the what ifs that that you've seen that hopefully that Mets fans would have held on to this year as possible contenders?
Yeah, of course. It's like you're talking about, look, for that mailbag yesterday, one person, I also asked people how they were doing during this quarantine time. One person goes, well, I'm just actually great. There's no blown leads yet. And another person goes,
Diaz hasn't blown a lead yet. Yeah.
Yeah. No Mets stress. Diaz is perfect on the season. But yeah, like the what ifs, the first one being the biggest one about a week ago, you look like everything for the Mets goes well during spring training. This is a fan base that is accustomed to heartbreak, having to root for a team that has a lot of dumb things happen. And so then last week, it's like that first hit of adversity, like, of course, that reminds you you're a Mets fan, is like Noah Syndergaard needing Tommy John surgery. That's a huge what if. And then, what if they put, would Pete Alonso have had a chance to tie his record if there were a full season? Would Jacob deGrom, if matches ERA? Now, he still could, but with the shorter season, like Pete said, of course, it's going to be different. That doesn't mean it means less, but yeah, I think a lot of people now are going to be wondering what this team could have done with a full season. On the other hand, though, this team was the best, one of the best teams in the league over the second half last year. So if you only give them a half season of baseball, I mean, maybe they get hot. I think we're going to see a lot of, if we do have a season that's heavily shortened, I think we're going to see a lot of funky contenders this year because of that. Teams will get hot, and maybe they wouldn't have been as great over 162 games, but I think the Mets are good enough maybe to get on a roll and see if they can do something.
Well, a lot remains to be seen, guys. Pete, Justin, thank you so much for coming on here and talking baseball. There's no baseball going on right now, but baseball, I've always said, is the one sport where you could talk about 365 days a year. And it's great to talk about it. Under these circumstances, it's difficult, but thank you guys so much for being on with me. I really do appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks, David.
Yep.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah.
And we'll talk again soon. I'd like to also thank some of the people who have made this show possible. Zach Miller behind the screen back there, Sean Oates, Mike Pedagano, Paul Wood, Elise Toribio, Brian Marin. These are the people who helped make this show a reality. Thanking them big time for this. Now is your time to subscribe for NorthJersey.com. We have the best in local news, features, entertainment, pro sports, high school sports. Please subscribe today. Go to NorthJersey.com. You get to read Pete Caldera and Justin Toscano every day. We'll be back next week. We'll talk some more sports. We're going to come back, probably do this on Thursday nights. We'll let you know, but that's what it's shaping up to be. We'll be on Facebook. We'll be on Twitter. We'll be on YouTube. So until then, we'll see you next week. Be well and stay safe, and have a good night, everybody.